very interesting, as they say. It now is a distinct honor and privilege to have as our next guest a governor and an admiral. And we used to have a president and admiral here, but now we have governors and admirals in the room. So I'd like to ask Governor Whitman and Admiral Allen if they would come up on the stage. While they're taking their seats, I noticed in the audience well, a whole bunch of formers, but we have two distinguished former members of Congress with us in the audience, and in the bipartisan spirit, one's a Republican and one's a Democrat. Dick Zimmer and Andy McGuire, former Congress representatives. So, Governor Christine Todd Whitman, she was New Jersey's 50th governor, I didn't realize that. 1994 to 2001, she entered the State House as New Jersey's first woman governor, the second Republican woman chief executive in any state, and the 13th woman governor in American history. From 2001 to 2003, she served as the administrator of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. She's currently the president of the Whitman Strategy Group, a firm that specializes in energy and environmental issues. And as President Brown said earlier, she is also this year's Monmouth University's Distinguished Public Servant in Residence. Please welcome Governor Whitman.
Thank you very much, and I want to congratulate Monmouth University for hosting this today, because what's going to be important is not so much setting the stage is going on now, but to me what's going to be important is what's going to occur later on in the day. Because it is critical that we start to think long-term, and we start to think about what we're really going to do, and how open are we going to be to using things like climate science to determine how we prepare for the future. Let me just give two numbers, $100 million and $300. Last year, from storms, droughts, floods, last year alone, it cost the United States over $100 billion in relief efforts. That's $300 for every person in the country. That means you don't have to live on the shore to be affected. You can be far away from where a disaster takes place, and yet it is going to cost all of us. I have found that, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to talk in terms of what's going on, what science can tell you is going on in climate change, that it's real, it's occurring. You can have all the arguments you want over who is really responsible or not. If you've looked out the window, if you've watched television, you know climate is changing. You know things are happening that we haven't seen before. They're happening more frequently, they're more severe. No credible scientist will say any one particular event is due to climate change, but they will tell you this is exactly what you can expect over time from the changing climate. And so, but that isn't what attracts people, unfortunately, or gets their attention. It becomes a storm like Sandy, and then you hear and look at the data that's been collected here, and unfortunately that tells you that even after being displaced from Sandy, people are still somewhat reluctant to take the kind of steps that I think deep down inside they know need to be taken. And that's probably the greatest challenge for government, and that's why I threw out those dollar numbers, because eventually it comes down to, what does it cost me? That's when people really start to pay attention. That's when they start to focus. And there are real consequences here. If we look at what's happened over time, if you look at the last, based on 15 million years of history, not theory, but of history, the last time that the concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere were as high as they are today and sustained at these levels, temperatures were 5 to 10 degrees higher, and the sea level was 75 to 120 feet higher. That is what's going to start to happen. It's a slow process. It doesn't happen all at once. But that's the kind of thing we can look at. Almost every model tells us within this century we're going to see a 5-foot sea level rise. If you think about that in context of the kinds of storms we've been seeing, you can see how much further inland these kinds of impacts are going to go. And of course, for those of us that don't live anywhere near the shore, as I don't, we were still off the grid for 12 days. We lost half a barn roof and over 100 trees. And that was a 100-year storm. We're seeing 100-year storms happen now every 5 years. And still, we seem to be reluctant to take the steps. And it's the biggest challenge for government. When you hear the numbers of people who are dissatisfied with the recovery efforts, I'm going to be very interested to hear what happens as you track people and determine what it was they actually asked for, what they expected. Because one of the things that I found when there was a disaster was if someone's lost everything, you can't make it right fast enough. There is no way. And so people are always going to be dissatisfied, but what we have to get them to focus on is what do we do to prevent this kind of thing in the future? And frankly, I think the state is doing the right thing when it is saying we are going to buy people out and we are going to have to use eminent domain. But what I don't see us doing, and where I think we have an enormous opportunity in this state, is to be the model for how can we think not 5 years out, but 10, 15, 25 years out. Because frankly, if you think about it, and again it gets back to money, what's going to happen to your property values? People are already, if you want to look, if you don't think things have happened, you just look in the Chesapeake Bay, and there you have Sharps Island and Holland Island. Holland Island just finally disappeared last year, or 2011. I mean, we've had thriving communities that are gone. That's right here on the East Coast, because things are changing. And so what we need to do as we plan, when we're talking about putting out groins in the sea, building seawalls, sand dunes aren't going to be enough anymore. We need to have the kinds of seawalls that are being proposed. But are you talking about just sea level rise, or are you talking about the way the current comes in? We've got to think differently. We've got to think beyond just a straight sea level rise. We've got to think, what does it mean when a storm comes in with sea level rise? We don't build them exactly the same way. We need that kind of long-term thinking. And we need to look at how do we rebuild our homes? Is 10 feet high enough? 14 feet high enough? One of the things that I would say that I think where we need to believe, where I believe we need to see a change is, I don't know why, frankly, and this may be controversial, I don't know why the federal government's in the insurance business. I think one of the problems we've had with FEMA flood insurance is that it's encouraged people to build and to rebuild in places where they shouldn't. And right now, FEMA's insurance, the insurance program part that is managed by FEMA, is totally underwater. They have paid. The whole presumption was that the money that they've got in, as with most insurance companies, that the money you get in pays for the occasional disaster. Well, the disasters aren't so occasional. And FEMA is now underwater as far as the ability to continue to pay out at the levels they've had to pay out the last few years. But what it has done is encourage people to rebuild, because we've said we've been there, we'll be there for them. Now, government has a role. Government should be there for disasters. Who else is going to be there for a disaster, immediate relief, immediate helping people find homes, find ability to pay for their mortgages, helping to try to get them back on their feet again. That's what government's role is there. But the long-term planning, then that government has a role, but it's up to people to make the decision. And frankly, if some people want to rebuild where their home was and it's gone now, fine. Go ahead, do it. But we're not going to pay for you when it floods the next time. FEMA isn't going to bail you out when it happens the next time. And your insurance rates are going to go up. And if you're willing to pay them, God bless you. But on the other hand, if you are living in a community where you refuse to raise your house and that's what is determined as needed to protect that community, then government does have a role to come in and say, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you the permits to build unless you were going to do it. And that is an enormous one, particularly here in New Jersey, where home rule is so sacrosanct. And as a country, we don't like big government telling us what to do, and I understand that. I'm not crazy about Big Brother. But there are times when government has got to be the one to say, you know what, if you don't build to the standard that we want, and your house gets washed away, guess where that debris goes? It may well go into your neighbor, and it may knock them out. And so you have a communal responsibility here. It's not just about you. These are not arbitrary standards, and that's where, to the point that Chris Daggett was getting and making, was that's where transparency comes in. We have got to have the broader discussion, which is what I hope is going to happen today, to outline why this is in the best interest of everyone. Because frankly, I found that people, when they have facts, make pretty darn good decisions. And they will understand if it's explained to them. This isn't about government being arbitrary. It's not people thinking, pulling things out of the sky. This is based on science. This is based on sound models. This is based on what's going to help protect you and protect your neighbor and give you something that you can pass on to your children and your children's children. One of the hardest things when you're in the environmental business, and particularly when you come from the regulatory side of it, is to ask people to change behavior or spend money on a problem they may not think exists or a solution they may never see. And yet that's our challenge today. You've got to make people think beyond the next 5 or 10 years. I hope that at the end of today, there will be some very concrete, far-reaching thought processes that are kind of gone on and that will actually be reduced to paper that can be used to help the decision makers reach out to the public, to get them engaged in the discussion as to why we need to think this way and what we need to do to really change the future, because that's what it's all about. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion, and thank you all very much for being here.